We dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides.
And welcome back to Liberty Nation Radio here on the Radio American Network. We're continuing our conversation with legal affairs editor and host of the Excellent Uprising podcast, Mr. Scott D. Cosenza. Earlier in the show, we were talking about the Fani Willis and Nathan Wade testimony in Georgia. And I'd like to come straight back to that, Scott, just because I think there's a couple of avenues that haven't been explored
great fun,
yet.
Mark, to discuss.
It is. It's Falcon's Crest. It's Dallas. It's Dynasty. It's all of the 80s stuff wrapped up into a neat little bundle. Now, so what are the I guess this is the big question. What are the ramifications for Donald Trump coming out of this?
Okay, so what the Judge McAfee is now deciding on is whether or not the defendants have met their burden to suggest that the inappropriate relationship between Ms. Wade and Mr. Willis, or I keep saying Ms. Wade, Mr. Wade and Ms. Willis was enough to
It's the 2020, Scott. It doesn't matter.
was enough to violate the defendant's rights to fairness, and if so, then what's the remedy? So it could be, even though perhaps you and I might disagree, the judge could say, no, I'm not weighing in on their personal behavior, but professionally, it doesn't rise to the level of misconduct that would trigger any consequence for the indictment or the prosecution going forward. And in that case, that's it. Nothing happens.
Yeah.
Meaning nothing happens as an order from Judge McAfee. Going forward, then Ms. Willis could continue to rely on Mr. Wade to do this prosecution. Now, I have some thoughts on whether or not that would actually occur. I think it probably wouldn't, given what we know now. But in any case, that could be the consequence. Or if Judge McAfee thinks that there was impropriety, that it impacted the rights of the defendants. Let's all remember, this is what, it's all through the lens of you have a right as a defendant to not have the inappropriate, relationship generate your indictment. So if it did, then the judge can say, well, the district attorney and her aides and appointees can't prosecute this case, but the state of Georgia can still go ahead and prosecute Mr. Trump if they want to. So therefore, the prosecution mechanism itself is tainted, but not the indictment itself. Okay. If that makes sense.
Yes.
And when one prosecutor goes and gets an indictment against a person, it's not DeKalb County or Fulton County or Fani Willis versus Donald Trump. It's the state of Georgia or the people of the state of Georgia versus Donald Trump. And so even if Fani Willis gets hit by a bus tomorrow, the indictment still stands unless and until a prosecutor or the state says something about it. So if that happened, the case would go to a Georgia State Prosecutors Association, a state office that's run by prosecutors, to assign competent counsel to prosecute the case. Now,
but to determine if the case should be continued or not, also, presumably.
The case lands in their lap. They have it, and they get a fresh eye on it. They don't have to continue the case. They can bring the charges or not bring them, as the case may be. Now, the huge benefit to that is the time involved, but we'll get into that in just a second. So that's one end of the spectrum of there was a problem and we're going to correct the problem. The other end is literally the judge could rule that the indictment itself is so tainted and poisoned by Ms. Willis's actions and Mr. Wade's action that it needs to be thrown out. And within that capacity of throwing it out, they can also throw it out, quote unquote, with prejudice, which means that they can't refile the charges. If they're not thrown out with prejudice, then another prosecutor, presumably even Ms. Willis, could refile charges. Now, all those things that we've just talked about that involve Ms. Willis not continuing to prosecute this case likely mean any prosecution advances well past the November presidential election, which, of course, is, as some of us suspect, the entire reason to bring the case is not election interference in the previous presidential election, but that Donald Trump is interfering with Democrats' election in the 2024 race by attempting to win it. And so it would be a win for Trump in any case if they take off Ms. Willis's office in any capacity, because it's a win for him, likely pushing proceedings well past the November elections.
And I guess that is in all of the indictments that 4 indictments, 91 felony counts that Donald Trump is facing, his best legal strategy is, as we've discussed before, to become president of the United States, correct?
Well, there's an interesting wrinkle about that. Yes, generally speaking, that's true. It is important to remind everyone that these are state charges.
Yes.
So
yeah.
the federal charges,
the Georgia
Donald
one's a
Trump
state
can literally,
charge,
the second he is sworn in, he can have the attorneys revoke those charges, fire them, the ones who issued it, let their replacements say to the court, and also issue himself a pardon. If he's smart, he'll have the pardon written out, waiting for his signature. And the second he takes the oath,
raises his hand off the Bible on the 20th of January,
right. With the other hand,
with a pardon stuck to it.
Yeah. But he cannot do the same thing with state charges. And in fact,
Yes.
one of the reasons why so many Never Trump folks were celebratory over both Mr. Bragg's criminal charges against him in New York and Ms. Willis's criminal charges in Georgia is that they can't be pardoned away. However, because he would then be president of the United States, he may be able to suspend that prosecution for the term of his presidency effectively. I mean, it's almost the whole game. I wanted to put that asterisk in there just to so everybody's clear with what the record is. But you're right in saying winning is the best strategy for him. If he can win, most of it goes away, and what doesn't go away will maybe eventually go away.
A quick turnaround on your thoughts on the $350 million civil verdict against Donald Trump in New York.
Mark, all my training and experience leads me to believe it will be reduced significantly on appeal. It is a monster order, like he blew up a small town with children in schools rather than some paperwork violation that nobody got injured over. So I think the smart money bet is it gets reduced massively.
Scott D. Cosenza, thank you ever so much for being with us.
Thank you, Mark.
And that's about all we have time for on this week's edition of Liberty Nation Radio. And I'd like to thank especially you at home for taking the time to tune in. Your attendance is appreciated. We dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides.
Don't get caught up in the media madness. Join our movement for free thinking and free speech at libertynation.com. Publishing news and analysis 24/7 with original articles by our team of authors who tell it like it is. Join us each week for online TV shows, The Uprising Podcast, and Liberty Nation Radio. We believe in free thinking and free speech. We are libertynation.com.